Welcome to my channel. I'm Ed Rabyd, otherwise known as the Rabyd Atheist. You are free to like or dislike the videos, so please feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it's released. Welcome to my channel again. Some channel news. Still waiting for that first subscriber. Maybe some will be able to say that they were the very first subscriber to the Rabyd Atheist. I wonder who that will be. Also, after today, my rotation of videos will be talking about my story, followed by a video concerning a theological issue, and then a video on a biblical issue. I'm sticking with what I know, which is myself, theology, and the Bible. As far as when these videos will be posted, I'm hoping to record ahead a bit. When I do, they will probably fall on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, respectively. I'm going to try 3 weeks, but if that doesn't work too well, I'll go to at least 2. Time will tell on that. It really depends on my work schedule and things that I do. That announcement out of the way, it's time to get to the main event, which is the main issue for me to talk about myself today is that of my deconversion story. When was the actual moment that I lost my faith? What caused me to lose my faith, and why? My background, I think, is necessary a little bit in brief. You need to know where I came from to know why my deconversion was such a pivotal event in my life and why it was so stressful. I had spent a good chunk of my life as a Christian, and I was a minister for well over half of that. So, or involved in a minister or involved in other things in the church before that. I grew up in a Christian home. From a very early time, my father and mother made sure I was in Sunday school. Some of my first memories are of beginner class, the Assemblies of God church that we attended. I grew up in church. I attended all the Sunday schools. When I got older and became a teen, I joined the youth group, the Bible quiz team. But it was through a number of combination of factors that I felt a call into the ministry. It wasn't too long after that, after graduation from high school, that me and my wife fell in love and we got married. My wife and I headed off within a few months to Bible college, where I spent 4 years at Trinity Bible College in Ellendale, North Dakota, dedicating my life to the pastoral ministry. And then I went off to Asbury Theological Seminary for a couple of years. Along the way, we had our 3 kids. I struggled a little bit after seminary to find my way. My father died my second year of seminary. That was very traumatic for me. I think that's when some of my more serious depression episodes developed from time to time. And I would suffer from those from time to time, even in the ministry. I finally found my way to becoming a Christian education director. And during that time, I was in charge of a Bible institute that I created. I was in charge of the Sunday school. It was probably my most successful time in ministry. I took a Sunday school of about 35 and turned it into 85. I started a Bible institute, like I said, from scratch. I ended up having class sizes, 10 to 12, and I would be the main instructor, and then the pastor of the church at the time would also be the main instructor. I became an Assemblies of God ordained minister a little bit after that. I pastored 2 churches for them, and until I felt that my leadership in my second church had kind of stabbed me in the back with it. And so I left the Assemblies of God. For a year, I kind of didn't know really what I wanted to do with ministry. And then somebody called me up and said, would you be interested in pastoring this non-denominational congregational church? Tried out for that. They voted me in. And I spent almost my last 10 years of ministry in that church. And it was there that while I was at that church that I lost my faith in about 2014. And I stayed in the pulpit for another 4 years. I say all this to make 2 points. I was truly a believing Christian and dedicated 40 years of my life to it. And 20 years of those life, I was even more dedicated as a pastor and as a minister. I gave up a lot of other opportunities for my life in order to be a minister. And so I really kind of resent the idea that I wasn't quote unquote really saved or really a Christian. That really comes from the once saved, always saved nonsense that I rejected even as a Christian. But it's really a nice little indoctrination thing to kind of keep everybody, saved. I mean, if I'm not wasn't a Christian after 40 years of dedication to Christ and 20 years of super dedication to Christ as a minister, then how would you ever know that anybody could really be saved? I don't know how you can say that other than you have a theological hindsight that says, oh, I've got to recast Ed as somebody that used to, who thought he was saved, but the whole time he was just really not saved. He really wasn't a Christian. He really wasn't all that dedicated. You know, that's your theological conviction talking, not reality. If anyone was a believer, it was me. I fought for the faith. I became an amateur apologist whenever I could. I studied creationism. I studied all the things that a believer needs to study in order to hold on to his faith. And I did that with every intention of holding on my faith. I started a blog called All Things Rabyd, uh, where I just explored theological issues for the pure purpose of trying to make this God of the Bible make sense. And I worked very hard at that. So understand this, that if you're going to come at me and say, I wasn't really saved and I wasn't really a Christian, I'm going to look at you and say, well, then how can anybody know that they're a believer? How can anybody even have any kind of assurance? If none of that leads to assurance, then what does? As I said before, in 2014, I lost my faith in Christianity and the Bible. It started with me preaching a series on salvation by faith. And while I was researching, I came across this quote by Dan Barker. He's currently the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. But I was looking at an old debate of his with a theist about Christianity. And he had this quote in that, and it stuck in my head, and I couldn't get rid of it. The quote is as follows: the very concept of sin comes from the Bible. Christianity offers to solve a problem of its own making. Would you be thankful to a person who cut you with a knife to sell you a bandage? And that bothered me because I began to realize, okay, if I can't find any proof of sin, that this concept known as sin exists outside of the Bible, Dan Barker is very correct. And so I began to think about it. I began to meditate on it. I was preaching a series on salvation and faith. So I was definitely studying the Bible about these things. And I still had not resolved the issue when I got to the message on sin. And so I stepped to the pulpit and I preached my message on sin, which is pretty standard. We're all sinners in the hands of an angry God kind of thing. I'm I'm not, jumping up and down, fire and brimstone preacher, but I kind of pointed out, that God is a just God, and we've messed up, so we've sinned, so we need a plan of salvation. And this quote kept bugging me. It really nagged at me that I couldn't come up with a solution for it because it was so painfully probably true. And I was trusting in a confidence that I'd always had that sometimes when I would preach, the Holy Spirit, at least I thought it was the Holy Spirit, would reveal to me what the answer might be. I preached the whole message. I still waited for an answer, didn't receive one. I sat down, and the absolute realization that Dan Barker was right just kind of flooded over me. This idea that sin was completely made up. It was a made up problem. I would never have thought that I would have had sin if I didn't have the Bible and I didn't have some preacher to tell me this. I would never have known or even thought of an idea called sin, nor would I believe that I possessed it. It became a real problem for me. And I began to examine this problem after that. But I want to go back to the moment where I sat down, because as I sat there and they took up the offering, we had a little bit of a moment after I preached where we'd sing a song and they'd take up the offering, and then and then I'd get up and do the final prayer, and then, the worship leader would dismiss so I could make my way to the back of the church so I could shake hands. But I was sitting there in that gap of time between the end of my message and while the song was being sung and the offering was being taken. I'm thinking, and this is where I'm going to violate my cussing rule because it hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, son of a bitch, Ed, you make your living on a made-up idea. You then preach grace for this made-up idea, and people are thankful to you and throw their money in the basket, and you get part of that to make your living. You sell bandages to people that you cut. It was a real low moment for me. I suddenly realized that everything about my life was based on a fraud, that I had no real reasons, no objective reasons, no rational reasons to believe that sin existed. And if sin doesn't exist, then the whole point of Christianity needing a redeemer through Jesus Christ kind of disappears. And the only thing I could hinge that on, and this is where my 4 theological objections to Christianity began to be developed. I began to question everything about my faith, but they began to crystallize in 4 things that as a theologian I could not answer. Number 1, I got back to that the Bible claims to be inspired, but offers no proof of this other than its own statements. The Bible doesn't have any outside source that says that it's inspired, it's all internal. I could easily say that everything that I write on my blog is inspired by the Norse god Odin. Would that be proof of it? And it's not really proof that the Bible's inspired for the Bible to say it's inspired. Anybody can do that. A salesman do that. Con artists do that. And I just didn't have any proof of that anymore. Of course, the sin was a man-made problem came up. Salvation through Christ is really a made-up solution that's unnecessary. And then the more that I looked at the God of the Bible, I began to see him for a character of fiction that has got to be, as Richard Dawkins said it, the most unpleasant character in all of fiction. And Dan Barker has gone on, by the way, to prove this by coming up with a full list of Bible quotes of some of the things that God has done that are straight up evil. And you have to conclude that the God of the Bible is quite frankly a concoction of human beings. It's made up. And it's when all those realizations, all those theological realizations hit me that I really realized that I didn't have any faith left. Now, as to my 4 theological objections, I'm going to go into more detail in them in a series of their own. But I simply state them here to understand that this was a well thought out problem for me. When Christianity died after that sermon, this was just me coming to the terms of the fact that the corpse was lying there and I needed to find a way to bury it. And I buried it by just not really acknowledging that I had lost my faith. I stayed in the pulpit. I didn't have any other way of making a living. I was a deist for a while and justified preaching as a way to help people get through their problems. The nature of my preaching changed to being, telling the stories of the Bible as if they were true, rather selling them as moral lessons. But the more I studied the Bible, the more I realized some of the stories have really bad moral lessons. I mean, when I took a fresh look at the story of Abraham, for instance, really? You're going to kill your kid because you think God is telling you to do that. Why would a loving, moral God even ask you to do that? That just doesn't make any sense. And I quickly began to realize as I read other atheists and agnostics, and I would do this, and people would notice that I was reading them. What am I doing? Well, I'm just doing some research. I'm trying to figure some things out. And I discovered quickly that there are natural explanations for most of the great hard questions that we think. I mean, the why question, what our purpose is, comes down to what do you want it to be? The origin of the universe becomes cosmology. The origin of life becomes abiogenesis. Or how life evolved becomes the theory of evolution. And I began to realize that all the creationists that I used to revere so much, I can boil down to their ministry as this. They're either banking on people's ignorance of not following up and going after them, they're ignorant themselves, or they're just plain frauds. The theological objections gave way to objections from reality, and slowly I've led myself to a point where I can find no rational reason to believe in a God, any God. That was a hard revelation, and I was still in the ministry when it happened. In 2018, a series of very bad personal events and a few bad decisions on my part brought about by stress of keeping all of this a secret. It eventually led me to leaving the ministry very roughly and being fired from my last church. It's sad, the sad truth. It is said that truth will either make a man a liar or keep what he wants to hold dear together, or it'll make him honest and cause him to change. I'm inherently honest, and the stress of the fact that I was living a lie, uh, I didn't believe anymore, but I was trying to be the chief believer of a church. And that person of faith eventually gave way to somebody that didn't have any. And it's the stress of that that eventually got me into a very bad emotional state, very depressed, and some bad decisions on my part were made. At the same time, the very ungracious nature of my firing, betrayal by somebody I trusted to handle that event, has really left a scar on my life. People that I preached grace to were very ungracious to me. They love grace when they receive it, but they had a real hard time giving it. I've forgiven my church. There's one man in that church that I will never forgive. I don't really fear hell or redemption because I don't do it. Forgiveness anymore. I feel forgiveness now needs to be earned a little bit. I say this last part because people say that my bad departure from my last church is what has led me to being an atheist. Some people might assert that. I want to point out that my faith was shipwrecked for years before this happened. This is more like the final curtain, the last bastion, the thing that finally broke the dam. And when that finally gave way, I fell hard and I fell very far. And it was a rough go for quite a while. It has been. This last year has been very difficult. There's really a genuine 4-year gap between the time I lost faith in Christianity until the time I personally left my church as a minister. The story has a bit of a happy ending. There's still a lot to remain to be seen. Part of my hopeful journey to something better is this YouTube channel and telling my story. I eventually, however, joined a thing called the Clergy Project. The Clergy Project is an organization of former and current ministers still caught in the pulpit who secretly are part of it, who are now either agnostics or atheists. Through them, and through this project, I've received emotional support by being part of the group. I've also received some transitional job training through a grant, and a wonderful, gracious secular counselor who is also an atheist has started giving me some personal counseling on how to transition through this. I've gotten the help I need, and I feel much better. People ask me how I feel these days. Well, on the one hand, I feel a lot better. I'm not dealing with any personal guilt. I'm not looking to some invisible sky daddy to give me purpose in my life. I'm looking for that on my own. I'm also not having to deal with a whole bunch of mandates that are made up. Thus, I can come up with my own morality, which I find I think far more about because I don't have an appeal to authority for morality anymore. I only have my own rational mind to wrap around the issues. And you know what? I think I'm a more moral person because of it. In many ways, a much better person than I ever was. But it has also provided me a motivation for this channel. It's provided me a motivation to do a lot of things. It's personally given me a personal motivation that every time I talk to somebody who wants to be a minister, particularly a young person, I'm going to tell you, don't waste your time. I spent 20 years that I could have been doing something better for me and my family. All those years are gone and wasted living in the land of make-believe. Don't do it. Get out of it. Stop it. At least don't go into ministry. You don't want to give up your faith. Go do something useful for 10 years and see if you change your mind. I can't caution young people enough about this. My closing comment is this. I am trying to make something good out of this journey. I'm trying to take my experiences and my knowledge from my 20 years as a minister and now turn them to do something actually genuine. For me, my main motivation is my own happiness. I still am very motivated to help others. Part of the reason is for this channel is to do that. I'm trying to help people kind of see their way and see a different side of things. But the one thing I do have to admit, the stress level in my life has dropped tremendously. I'm not trying to hold on to something that I believe is true at the expense of reality. I'm trying to let reality guide my truth. And yeah, that can be scary. And yeah, sometimes I just have to say, I don't know. But at least that's an honest position. It's a position that allows me to pursue and go through my life a lot happier in a lot of ways. Do I still have my struggles? Do I still have my issues to work out? Yes. But I am going to say that I feel a lot better than I ever have in a long time. And I'm discovering that maybe, just maybe, there's life after ministry. I sincerely hope that's true. Once again, I want to thank you for spending the time listening to me. Welcome to my channel. Just a reminder, the comments, in the comments, if you have a question, I will probably address those comments at the next end of the next video if I don't have time to do it in the comments section. I remind you I have a lot of irons in the fire, so I converse with the comments when I have time. Otherwise, if there's a common question, I'll answer it at the end of the next video, so make sure you're subscribed so you get that. And once again, remind you as you comment, I don't tolerate name calling, so be advised. Be sure to like, subscribe, and get your notifications. And as always, I hopefully can convince you someday to be a rabid atheist like myself. Goodbye. Have a good day.